years ago, and he talked about that within the future, all they would need to do was to broadcast a certain signal from a satellite, and they'd be able to tell people what to think.
Absolutely, and that's what they're doing.
Well,
you know,
I've got
yeah.
something to add on to that, Stewart. We've got this mandatory digital conversion of TVs happening here in February of 2009. What do you make of that?
Well, there's a reason for that, and that's because the digital signal carries the mind control waves. And, you know, even when your television, your computer, your phones, even when these things are not turned on, they are still transmitting. And they have devices in them that actually can watch you. And that's what people don't even realize. In their new cars, there's a little black box that can be controlled remotely by the police and will tell them everything they need to know about you.
Now, let's say you buy a car, you've got this black box in your car. If you had a friend that was a mechanic, could you actually have the mechanic remove that and still have your car operate properly?
Well, let's put, that technically is illegal. But yes, I suppose it could be done, but my feeling is it would be known, and then the people involved would have a lot of trouble.
Okay. And we've got a question. How can we stop this whole scenario from transforming and taking place?
Well, I'm asked that at every lecture and seminar that I do. And the answer is that's why I teach what I call the language of hyperspace, to open up the 90% of the brain that isn't used and the 97% of the DNA that's called junk DNA and is not used. I teach them in my work how to open this up and to remove the victimization mind pattern that's inherent in the human species. Because as a whole species, the human kind attracts oppressors and tyrants with their mind patterns. So if we can release the negative thoughts and replace them with positive, beneficial ones, then we can stop this pretty quickly. But it has to be...
I know Walt Disney movies kind of play on that whole victimization.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of suppresses the whole victimization that a person went through. Let's say someone was molested as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, Disney movies suppress that whole episode and keep it stuffed away so that it's not being talked about or even released out in public. Is that true?
Well, Disney has a lot of subliminal information in its films, both in the cartoon and the human films. That's known. Disney is one of the major mind control manufacturers on the planet. And that's what Disney centers are all about.
So as far as the mind control aspect, how does Disney play into that? Just with subliminal?
With subliminals, with icons, for example, there is something called Disney programming, where, let's say, just as an example, Mickey Mouse, okay? Let's say a child is programmed to follow whatever Mickey Mouse says. So whenever the child sees a doll of Mickey Mouse or a cartoon or anything that has that, he goes into an altar that then can be follow sets of instructions given by that icon. So that's part of what goes on there.
You're familiar with David Icke's research?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. He talks a lot about how Disney movies suppress feelings of when someone was molested or raped or of some sort, to where they're drawn to these types of movies, and it's a way that it kind of suppresses those feelings that they had growing up and they keep bottled in. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I know David personally. His work is very good. He was gracious enough to put a lot of my work in his last book, and I've been in a couple of other books of his. And yes, Disney is known for its mind control. They have their own prison system in Disneyland and Disney World. They have their own underground tunnels. One of my clients years ago was a supervisor at the Orlando Disney World, and she told me that there are vast tunnels underneath, which, of course, they say that's for the workers to go travel around the compounds without being seen on the surface. But she said there are other tunnels that no one is allowed to go in. Even supervisors are not allowed to go in there. And she didn't know what was going on in those areas.
I read both of Kathy O'Brien's books regarding MK Ultra, and she mentioned Dick Cheney. I think in the first one, in Transformation of America, that Dick Cheney was at Disneyland Disney World all the time with children. Is there any validity to what she was saying?
Yes, he's a known pedophile in the mind control programming world, as well as many other people and high up in government, including the president. There are many stories that my clients have told me. I have clients who had a very close encounters with the president and his father. So yes, these are things that go on all of the time.
The Clintons are involved too.
Oh, big time, big time. That's why when I see Hillary giving these rousing standing ovation speeches, I just can't believe that people blindly accept this fake person if they actually knew what she was like.
Agreed.
Well,
I wanted to...
It says a lot just by the fact that she's willing to stay with a husband for this long who's known to womanize and go off and do his own thing. So.
Well, I think they share their dates, if you get my drift.
Right. That's fine. I agree with you on that, too. All right, go ahead, Colt. What were you going to ask?
I wanted to talk about Mauntauk. You have a film coming out, right?
Well, I don't have a film coming out, but I'm in a film that's been produced called...
Tell us about it.
Well, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about that film because I didn't produce it. I just was in it. But it's Mauntauk Unveiled. I filmed that about a couple of years ago, and it's basically to expose what happened in the mind control experimentations in Mauntauk and actually other experiments.
Now, Mauntauk, for anyone that doesn't know, Mauntauk is actually in Long Island, and was Mauntauk started as a continuation of the Philadelphia experiment and time travel? Was that the original purpose of it?
They were actually two separate experiments that became connected energetically when the Eldridge, the USS Eldridge, went into its hyperspace mode, and then it connected. Two of the sailors that were on that ship connected to the Mauntauk project. The ship was used in 1943, and these men connected to 1983 Mauntauk. And the reason that happened was because of the electromagnetic resonance, or the frequency pulse that was involved that matched. So they basically hooked up like a ring in time and space. So the two were energetically intertwined. People can read the Mauntauk book series. I wrote one of those books called Mauntauk, the Alien Connection, which was my personal story of my experiences there for those 13 years. But the Philadelphia experiment started out to be to cloak aircraft and ships in wartime so that they could not be seen. And Mauntauk was really about what I mentioned earlier, the genetic manipulation and even time travel. And then they just all hooked up together when there was this unscheduled link.
And psychological warfare was another huge part of it.
Well, yeah, that falls under the heading of the mind control. When you are a relatively small group of people, meaningly in the hundreds of thousands, and you need to control billions of people, armies are not enough because the masses could overwhelm you. So the most logical thing you can do is to mind control those billions so that they don't realize what you're doing to them.
Agreed. I recently read that funding for Project Mauntauk supposedly came from $10 billion in Nazi gold, recovered by the U.S. Army in France near the Switzerland border. Is there any validity to that?
That's only partially what covered it. because it was also funded by black ops or fake taxes that were diverted from the public to these operations through other fronts that the government had set up. And now, these projects are just pretty much in the open in the budget.
What was Nikola Tesla's connection to Project Mauntauk?
Well, his connection was that he